Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to imagine every headline, every viral post, and every single political claim you encounter as an active crime scene. Seriously, because today we are going to crack the case on how our minds are manipulated and, more importantly, how we can actually defend ourselves. We're going to examine this really fascinating duel, and kind of a duet really, between two totally distinct methods of reasoning. In a media landscape that is just saturated with half-truths and hidden agendas, understanding these two frameworks is a vital survival skill. So get comfortable. We are about to look closely at the invisible structures that hold up literally every claim you see on the news, in your feed, and in everyday conversation.
Okay, step into the shoes of a detective arriving at the scene. How do we actually move from scattered evidence to a rock-solid conclusion? And maybe more importantly, where does that process break down? I mean, as any seasoned detective knows, we almost never have all the facts, right? We are constantly forced to make sense of incomplete data, fragmented clues, and blurry snapshots of reality. So how we solve the mystery of what's actually true when we just don't have the whole picture? Well, to crack this case, we need to understand the tools at our disposal.
To survive this modern media landscape, we really need two distinct ways of thinking. It's like we need to adopt two different personas. First, you have the detective. This is represented by the biologist Thomas Huxley, who builds arguments from the ground up using scattered clues. And second, you have the logician. Think of the philosopher Aristotle, who gives us a rigid machine to test if those arguments actually hold water. So the logician tests arguments, while the detective builds them. We absolutely need both of these voices in our head to survive out there.
Right, let's start by gathering some clues. Thomas Huxley championed what he called the Zadig method. It was named after this fictional sleuth who could essentially reconstruct past events and predict future ones just by looking at fragmented evidence. And that right there is the pure essence of inductive reasoning. You don't start with some grand, proven theory. You start with, footprints in the mud, a broken branch, maybe a strange financial transaction. It's the essential method used by Sherlock Holmes, by scientists like Charles Darwin, and by historians who are trying to piece together the past. You are basically working backward from the effects to find the most probable cause.
Think about a completely normal morning. You walk outside and the sidewalk is wet. That's your raw data. Your mind immediately starts generating possible explanations. Did it rain? Did a sprinkler run? Did someone wash their car? But then you look a little closer. The street is bone dry. The cars parked on the street are completely dry, so it probably wasn't rain. You've just used induction. You move from a specific, tiny fragment of evidence to the most likely reality. It deals entirely in probabilities and educated guesses, not absolute certainties.
But this is exactly where those educated guesses can become pretty dangerous. And that's where the logician steps in. The logician doesn't care about your footprints in the mud. They care about the structural integrity of the claim you've just built. Because once you've inferred a conclusion, how do you actually stress test it? You can't just rely on a hunch. You have to lock it in the cage.
Aristotle actually gave us this exact cage over 2,000 years ago, and it's called the syllogism. I want you to think of it as a rigid, unyielding machine. You feed your starting premises into the top of the machine, and if the internal structure is perfectly valid, an absolute conclusion drops out the bottom. So while induction guesses the best explanation, deduction proves what logically must follow if your starting points are true. It relies entirely on absolute certainty.
You've probably heard Aristotle's classic framework before. It goes, if all humans are mortal and Socrates is human, then Socrates is mortal. The logic there is flawless, right? If premise A is true and premise B is true, the conclusion is undeniably true. But our logician offers a really stern warning here. A syllogism can be perfectly logical and still be completely, dangerously wrong if the underlying premises are false. For example, if you say, all government programs are wasteful, this is a government program, therefore this is wasteful, the internal logic works perfectly. But is that first premise actually true?
So, this brings the detective and the logician together to ask what is arguably the single most important question in critical thinking. What would need to be true for this claim to hold? Whenever you hear a politician, an advertiser, or an influencer make some bold claim, applying this specific question is basically your ultimate superpower. It acts just like a blacklight at a crime scene. It exposes all those hidden, unstated elements that the speaker is desperately hoping you'll just accept without a second thought.
To survive out there, you really need to know the anatomy of a claim. An assertion is just a statement yelled through a megaphone. It's presented as absolute truth with zero proof. This policy is corrupt is an assertion. A premise, on the other hand, acts as a pillar supporting a conclusion. An argument actually connects observable evidence to clear reasoning. But then we have the assumption, and this is the dangerous one. It's the hidden iceberg right beneath the surface. It's an unstated idea the speaker expects you to just swallow implicitly.
Learning to distinguish an honest argument from a manipulative assertion is absolutely everything.
Let's map this out with a very common political claim. This policy is wasteful. Okay, what's the observable evidence? Well, an audit found repeated spending errors. Okay, that is real hard data. The reasoning, or the warrant, suggests that repeated errors mean weak oversight. Fair enough. But look closely at the hidden assumption holding it all together. Weak oversight makes the entire policy ineffective. The speaker didn't actually say that out loud, but their whole claim relies entirely on it being true. And the counter-evidence reveals that, hey, maybe those errors were minor and immediately fixed. By mapping the argument out organically like this, you instantly separate the hard data from the sneaky, unstated assumptions.
And this is exactly where things get nefarious. We're not just talking about bad logic anymore. We are looking at a cognitive crime scene. There is this vulnerable space between Huxley's induction and Aristotle's deduction, and manipulators exploit it hundreds of times a day. We call this space the propaganda gap. It is the precise location where your own reasoning gets hijacked by someone else's agenda. And the absolute worst part? You usually don't even realize it's happening.
So how does the trap actually snap shut? First, they hit you with emotional, fragmentary evidence, a scary anecdote, an angry photo. This is essentially weaponized induction. Then, they completely hide their flawed premises, just abandoning Aristotle's rules of transparency entirely. And finally, they step back and let you, the audience, complete the logical circuit in your own mind. This is cognitively devastating. Why? Because when you connect the dots yourself, it doesn't feel like someone is pushing an assertion on you. It feels like you made a personal discovery. You feel convinced because you genuinely believe you reasoned it out yourself. Advertisers are absolute masters of the propaganda gap. Take what we call the beautiful people trap. You see a commercial filled with incredibly attractive, happy people driving a specific car or maybe drinking a specific soda. That right there is the emotional inductive clue. The missing logic, the unstated premise, is if you buy this product, you will also be beautiful and happy. Now, they never actually say that out loud, because if they did, your analytical logician brain would immediately reject it as absurd. Instead, they substitute emotional clues for actual data, just hoping you'll automatically fill in the blank without checking the validity.
So how do we actually defend ourselves against this? First things first, you have to stop the automatic circuit. When you feel that emotional pull, take a step back and ask, what is the explicitly stated evidence here? Look for just the raw facts. Then ask, what reasoning actually connects this evidence to their grand claim? And finally, summon Aristotle and ask, are the underlying premises actually true? If you can't answer all three of those, it's not an argument, it's just manipulation dressed up as truth.
It definitely takes work to view the world this way. It takes the observational awareness of the detective to spot the clues, and the structural discipline of the logician to test the cage. But combining deduction and induction is really the only way to navigate a media-saturated environment safely. So the very next time you see a viral post, a persuasive ad, or a fiery political speech that makes you feel absolute certainty, I want you to pause, look for the gap, and ask yourself this one incredibly powerful question. What is the missing premise? Keep questioning, keep testing, and I'll see you in the next explainer.